Hey, 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 hey. Yeah, 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 yeah. All right. What's going on, Anthony? Does this look familiar? Anthony, how's the audio quality on this? Can you hear everything all right? G2. Cool, man. The G2 is very popular. Yeah, I'm trying something a little bit different. We're using my Sony A7S2, and then I'm going into a Blackmagic um, recording device that goes directly into the to YouTube. So it's got all the visual components of the Sony cameras, but the live streaming capability of YouTube. So we're just kind of trying it out. I actually was just on the phone with our buddy Rhett to get this figured out. It took a minute, but traced it down to a bad HDMI cable at the end. So now we're looking good. Audio is coming off the camera. I have a Rode mic hooked up to it, and I've kind of just patted it down. So hopefully there's not any clipping on the voice part there. So what's going on this board here, Phil? If you're still with us. Let's talk pedal boards here, people. We got 20 watchers. Tell me about your rigs. Tell me about your problems. Yeah, the Blackmagic, Anthony, is super cheap. It's like $100. I think it's $100 on Amazon, and clearly the benefit is there. It's just a little tricky to set up, is one thing I'll say. Once you get it, you're good. Board is super tight. You swap out a few pedals. Dang. I mean, why do you need to disassemble it? Is it on a flat board or is it on some sort of angled board, or what's the reason it all needs to be disassembled? It sounds like a nightmare. Oh, an RJM. Got it. Oh, you know, that guy's waiting for an RJM. Who's that? Marcos. Yeah, those RJMs are, I would say, probably the best built of any of the switchers out there. As far as the build quality, they're really excellent. I also think the Musicom Labs is incredibly well built and has great feature sets as well. But my favorite for value versus features is the Boss. And the reason why is that, you know, a lot of people rag on Boss, but they have the biggest R&D budget of any pedal company. And I would say that their software is superior to any of the others that I've seen. And it offers, you know, the switching matrix so that you can put any of these pedals in any order. And I know that that's not anything new. There's plenty of other brands that do that. But the way that this interfaces is definitely the most user friendly, and I think that it actually sounds really good. The buffers in here, you know, is it as good as a great standalone buffer? No, but if it's, you know, pretty good for 99% of consumers, then it has my stamp of approval. Let's see. Yeah, Phil, man, that's a bummer. That's such a pain. You should email me a picture and maybe I can make some suggestions to you. Fender Deluxe. Okay, I'm looking at Sam Brown. Fender Deluxe reissue. On the preamp side, did the tone of my pedals. And rig through the reverb trim side. Is it bad for the tubes to run only through the vibrato side and not the normal side? I just want to make sure I'm understanding your question. Shouldn't be any problem there. I'm not a fan of the Boss ES8 as it limits you to so few pedals. Yeah, well, there's some tricks actually with the ES8 that a lot of people don't know. Hold on. Sorry, I just needed to grab some more zip ties. So with the ES8, there's a few tricks. One of them is that you can actually use a 9th loop if you use the volume loop. So that can be pretty slick. If you you won't have instant access foot switch for it unless you program that, but it allows you to actually have a 9th loop. I know it's not quite 12, but that's one option. And also, you know, in a lot of rigs, like things like wahs or fuzzes, I don't typically recommend that you put in one of those loops, because then it limits your ability to be able to buffer or reroute the signal path if you have something that's impedance sensitive. So usually for most rigs, if you can't do it with, let's say, you know, 10 pedals and a volume pedal, you know, that's, I would say that, you know, maybe you need to pare down a little bit. But yeah, I think, I bet they're not far off from a 12 button or 12 loop version. I think that's inevitable. This board, let's see, what is this board? Anthony probably remembers if he can chime in. I think it's like 27 by 12. And it'll probably come out around 25 pounds or so, I think. You can just go on our website, Marcos, and there's an email thing in there for you to send stuff. 2 power supplies for Phil. Well, you know, sometimes that under the board space is not so critical if you have the right stuff. Like we have these aluminum risers here, and I can fit this right over the top, and it You know, I could have another power supply in here if I either pared down some of the pedals. If I had to, I might even be able to fit in an Ojai on this without extending the footprint at all. So that's also a possibility on something like this. 28 by 12, so I was close. Sam Brown, yeah, rumors. Sam, I'm just wondering what you mean by like the preamp side. Are you somehow splitting between the preamp and the power amp on a deluxe reverb, or is this a hot rod deluxe where there's an effects loop and you're breaking in between the preamp and power amp? Alright. This is looking pretty good here. Basically everything on this thing is kind of wired into the source to keep all this neatness here. You know, if you see, it's like super clean as far as how all these things are coming in. There's no wasted space. And the way that I do that is I actually solder all of the cable connections first and get those all routed, and then I route everything into the switcher and then wire that last. So that way I can kind of get all of my angles really tight, and then I can just kind of solder these one by one into the switcher, and we have really perfectly cut cables. Now I'll leave a little extra slack on this side, you know, so I might have it, you know, looking something like this, and it's covered by the riser, so it won't look, you know, terrible. And I don't leave a ton of space, but it is, if somebody, let's say, wanted to reroute, if, you know, a year from now, Anthony's like, you know what, the Ultraphonics is a real piece of junk, and I really want to put in whatever pedal, that these can be rerouted for side jacks or whatever it is, so he's not going to be locked into that. So I'd rather leave the slack here where there's no chance of it getting kicked or bumped or anything like that. So that's a tip that I have if you are wiring a switcher in. Getting an electric guitarist. Well, pedal wise, I mean, doesn't everybody start with a DS1 or a Tube Screamer? Sort of a good way to calibrate yourself. I don't know, man. I mean, you could get the multi-effects thing, but you just have a bunch of stuff that kind of sounds so-so. They've gotten better. You know what's cool is the real small version of this one called the MS3, where it's got like all the Boss multi-effects, and I think you have like 3 loops for like analog pedals or outboard pedals, and it's maybe like 2/3 this size, or a third smaller rather. That's pretty cool. Power and signal routing tips for angled boards. Man, the thing that you should do with angle boards to increase the surface area is literally just get a platform like this without any of the extrusion and literally just mount it right to the top. Because it's so bizarre, you have these slats and you limit the area where you can actually like route cables, and troubleshooting pedal trains is a nightmare. And that's why I always encourage people to use flat boards. You can even look on... If you look on our YouTube channel, you can see where I get all my flat boards made from Get Off My Case. Those guys are incredibly reasonable. I think this, Anthony can tell us exactly how much this board was, but I think it was less than $100. Or if it was more, it was like literally right around there. And to just even buy, I don't think you can buy a pedal train for $100 it's even close to this size. But even if you could, I would highly suggest putting a piece of even just like 1/2-inch plywood that's laminated with ABS and like a Formica top. This is basically a countertop type laminate that goes on this. I don't recommend ABS on the top. I notice a lot of pedal boards are made out of ABS on the top, and that is a petroleum-based product, and it really sucks if you're trying to put adhesive Velcro to it, because it's got like an oil texture, and so it just comes right up. So don't do that, but get like a Formica top like this and literally just put it right down on top of the pedal train. Obviously you're going to have to route the power underneath, I think is probably that makes the most sense. But as far as all the audio, you can wire that all on top. That'll cut down your troubleshooting time a lot if you have any issues. If you email me, I'll send you a picture. I did an exact copy of John Mayer's Deading Company rig on a Pedal Train 1, I think. And and did that technique, and I was able to basically consolidate the whole thing. I think he used like a pedal train 2 or one of the larger ones, and I was able to get the exact same stuff on a pedal train 1 by doing it that way. So definitely check that out. I'll email it to you if you can't find it. I think it might even be on our Instagram page, which is at Vertex Effects. Favorite Fender amp? A vintage one, probably a deluxe reverb. I have a 64, and for the newer ones, I think the 68 reissues are incredible. I wouldn't say that they're like perfect, era correct, but they sound really good, and I'd say as good or better as a lot of the expensive reissues. And if you change the speaker to Alessandro, either the 12 or the 10 inch, those are really good speakers that work great in there. If you want like kind of a classic Fender concert speaker, I recommend that. So $95 for this board, so that's pretty cheap. I mean, these are all custom, made to order, and there's a video again of that in our YouTube channel. Do I know a good flatboard supplier in the EU? I don't, but I bet that the guys at Get Off My Case would ship it to you. Red Scholl, he's the man. I was just talking to him this morning. Oh, okay, I see, Charlie. You got Fender Hot Rod DeVille. Those are cool amps, man. They can be cool. A few little mods, even just to make them more reliable. They can be super hip. So, guys, I think I'm sort of done with like the main kind of cable round. I think almost everything's ready. I also should mention, if you haven't seen it already, I have this Strymon, as was dubbed by Rhett Scholl, the Strymon Bridge, and this is going to be going on top of this whole thing, like this, and we have also a compressor here that's going to go on the side. But I've already pretty much, these are going outside of the ES5 because these are all going to be controlled by MIDI. One also thing I should tell people about MIDI that's hip is I made this really cool splitter cable, and you can see that like 3 MIDI connections are coming out of this one thing. A lot of times Strymons are fine, but a lot of times when you're using like Strymon and H9 and all these different companies that have different variations on how they do MIDI, sometimes they don't talk to each other real well, and so you have to buy either a box that splits the MIDI, like MIDI Solutions makes one, or I found a cooler way is just split it right here at the pump, and I literally just wire the 3 MIDI cables out from the source, and then that eliminates, first of all, you needing to have another box, and it also eliminates you needing to do all this MIDI cabling on the back where you go MIDI in, MIDI out, MIDI in, MIDI out, MIDI in. So it eliminates a bunch of MIDI cables. It works great. I've already tested this thing, and the hip thing is you can actually just use TRS cables for this, or a mic cable would even work, because we don't use phantom power typically on guitar pedals. We're only using the 3 middle pins on a MIDI DIN protocol like this. So you don't even need to use like the whole 5-pin thing. So you can get away with a lot smaller cables on this. And this isn't carrying audio, so it's not like there's any benefit by using a thick conductor or anything like that. Right, patent pending. Did you rivet or screw the bridge? They're screwed in through the bottom, so these are completely screwed on. You could pick these up, and there's 2 screws, and then it's got PEM nuts on the top and bottom that actually secure it. I think it's a number 6 screw. Have you ever used the MXR? I haven't used the MXR ISO brick, but one of the guys that works for us, Mason Mejia, the second Mason, uses one, and he likes it. I haven't seen it. We're going to actually build his board here soon, so I'll get some experience with it, and I'll let you know what I think. Yeah, I'll let you know, Richie. I don't know. I don't know, but I like these Zumas. I like the True Tone stuff a lot, but if you already have an ISO brick and it's doing its thing, I'd say, what do you risk? Yeah, Phil, that's the move, man, because we didn't have any other space here to put even one of those MIDI Solutions boxes. It's like, it's this size, and it just has a MIDI in and then a bunch of MIDI splitting devices, and they're made out of plastic, and it's just kind of a mess. Just doing it right out of here is super slick. We actually did this for Rhett's board too, and it's sort of a practice that I've gotten into doing a lot lately. The only issue is just finding a cable that has a thin enough diameter so that they all fit through comfortably, and you're not putting a bunch of stress on the connector. All right. You notice here I label everything, and this is just so you don't get your wires crossed, because it's real easy to forget what cables are going to what unless you have everything labeled. Even if you have it labeled sometimes and you maybe cut something preemptively, it can still be a nightmare to like track down exactly what it was. So it's always a good idea to label all this stuff. This is one of my favorite volume pedals, by the way, the Dunlop. On this one, we're not, but we very easily could. The only downside of doing that is then you can't run it stereo. So if you ever, right now in this particular scenario, if Anthony, who's the guy I'm building the board for, and he's on the chat here, if you ever want to run this in stereo, he couldn't. Whereas right now, I can make him an extra set of cables, and he could run this thing in stereo, no problem. And I think that the pre-post thing, for the most part, you know, I think it's a cool feature. But I've done it for probably like 6 or 8 guys over time since the Mogami was available, and most of them just use it post, because most of those effects, you know, most of them, I'm not gonna say all of them, but most of them, I'd say the only ones that are cool to run, to have the option to run either, are the Univibe can be cool to run before, and the flanger and phaser can sometimes be cool to run before. But like stuff like chorus, tremolo, rotary, that stuff's all better after. But there is an option to do it either way for sure, and you don't risk anything by wiring it that way unless you want to run stereo. Then you can't get stereo modulation. You'd only get stereo delay and reverb. Hold on, I need to plug in this computer here. Don't want to lose our live stream. If you guys are curious about any of the stuff that we're using on this, you can reference the any of the videos that we have on our Rig Doctor page, and that'll allow you to take a look at all of the different cables and zip ties and any of the custom risers or lifts or pedalboard materials, DC power plugs, all that stuff. I just put out one yesterday, if you haven't watched it, that's how to split power on a power supply to sort of maximize the capabilities of your power supply, because a lot of folks are using multiple supplies when they could get away with fewer. And you know, it's not a perfect science. We're definitely doing it on this rig because we have 12 total pedals, only 9 outputs. So you can see even on here I've labeled that ultraphonics and compressor are sharing, the tone seeker and steel string are sharing, and the boost and the DEOD are all sharing power, and then everything else has its own. And this is just because we tested and we found that this was the best way to kind of noise-free combine these pedals. You have a nice routing right here into this volume pedal. It's going to look great. I've also modded this volume pedal to be an interface, essentially, for the entire rig. So that's why we have stuff coming into the tuner output on this one, or what would normally be the tuner output. Is I've actually made it so that it's a send and return. So your guitar comes in, and then this is sending out to all the pedals, and then it's returning into what was formerly the tuner out, and then the output to the amp will come right out of this volume pedal. So all of the ins and outs are actually routed through the volume pedal now, which is a pretty cool thing. Milliamps on the ES8, I have no idea. I would guess probably around 500 because I've been able to power it off of any of this stuff. This is an ES5, and if you really want to know, I guess I could measure it for you, but I would imagine it's somewhere around 200 or 300 probably. Your recommendations for a fuzzy drive that's more tweed-like than the dynamic distortion. Well, you can get the tone secret to get fuzzy if you crank the treble, because that's interactive with the gain, and it's got that mid-range for sure for the tweed thing. There's also a kind of a tweed sounding pedal made by Mad Professor that's pretty cool, that my old buddy Marco gave me from Mad Professor. Yeah, I mean, that's 18 volts for the steel string is doubling the headroom. I actually find on the steel string, if you have a small combo amp, that 18 volts is beneficial because you want the headroom, because the steel string, because it is literally based on the first Dumble steel string Singer ever made, which we use to compare it with. There is a tremendous amount of low end in that amp. And if you look at a lot of the old like Stevie Ray Vaughan videos and stuff like that where he's using a steel string Singer, even those Hot Licks videos with Eric Johnson, they almost all turn the bass off, kind of like how they do on Fenders, because there's so much low end. And so the pedal, to keep it, keep fidelity to the real thing, has a big low end and low mid thing that those amps do. But in small combo amps, especially stuff like 10-inch speakers and stuff that's not super efficient, it can almost be too much bass. So the 18 volts really helps that, because it increases the headroom quite a bit, and it allows you to get kind of more of the traditional note bloom that you would expect from it. You don't have to plug into, I don't know, something that's a higher wattage Fender like a Bandmaster or a Twin Reverb or something like that. You can still do it with your Princeton and get convincing sounds out of it that way. All right. Yeah, I mean, Nathan, the slat thing, I think the pedal train is great from a consumer standpoint. It allows you, to get started right away. And there used to be so much mysticism around this sort of stuff. Like, nobody knew where to get stuff. I know this is going to be uncool, but I'm going to do a little soldering here, and I don't want to wreck up any of these pedals, so I'm just going to throw that over the top just to protect everything. So I'm waiting for the iron to warm up, so I'll take a few of these. Yeah, Nathan, just put this. Go to Get Off My Case, the guys that build our boards. Tell them the dimensions of the pedal train, and just tell them you want basically the same thing that they'd make for me as one of my like lifts or risers. I'll show you. Actually, got one right here. It won't fit on your board, but it'll give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So check this thing out. This is basically, I mean, this is way thicker than you need. I think that this is 1 inch, but you could get a 1/2 inch version of this that's just laminated, has no extrusion around it, and just have them make you one of those at the size of your pedal train, and you'll be totally fine. You just mount that right. You can go from the bottom. You can just drill it in with some self-tapping screws, and it'll look great. And it'll give you all that space, and you can just drill a few holes for where you want the power to come out. You know, you can just get like a bigger bit, like let's see if I have one here. Well, sometimes if it's a certain diameter, right, you can use a step drill bit, and that will work fine on the wood. Otherwise, you can get like a larger bit at Home Depot or any of those places, and it'll look great. Have you tried the Studio Pro 35 to back up the bass? Yeah. Okay, yeah, I tried the 2-rock. I got it. Upside down view is frying your brain. Yeah, I don't think that there's a way that I can flip it, because this is basically mounted to the wall. I guess just turn your computer upside down. I'll look into it for next time to see if there's a way for me to flip the view to be more point of view of my point of view. You're doing a slimmer mod on a Lely volume pedal. I haven't. I'm sure. Well, anything is possible, but I'd actually imagine that in those the Lely stuff, he's pretty efficient. I wonder whether there's much extra space in there to do stuff like this. I'm sure it's possible, but I don't know how advisable it is. By the way, these connectors that I'm using right here are great alternatives I found to Switchcraft 380s, which I think for this sort of application was a great small plug alternative. But the problem with the 380s is that there's no strain relief, and this has strain relief on it, and so it really allows you to be able to keep the cable intact and not have to worry about just heat shrinking the crap out of it to get it to work properly on a board, and not have to worry about all of the possible problems of having no crimp on a cable. I know that they don't get like a big workout when they're on a switcher like this, but having this strain relief here is super important, just to keep everything together. If it takes a big pull or something like that, you can. This piece right here, the 380, does not have that strain relief, and these are really the same exact size. Back. I think we lost some power for a second here. If everything looks good, just give me a thumbs up here in the comments. I want to make sure we didn't lose everything. Are we back, Anthony? All right, cool. Yeah, there was like a little power outage here for a second. So hang in there. Say we lose power again. Sometimes it happens. So you're saying MIDI cables for guitar signals only use... Well, I'm not saying for guitar signals. I'm saying for guitar pedals, typically don't use the outside pins. Those are generally for phantom power. So I mean, you know, if you bought a MIDI cable, it would obviously have all 5 pins soldered. But for what we're doing, we don't need those because we're not using phantom power. This came out good. You know, I can't use 2 right angles here just because of the distance, but this is going to look good, and I'm going to put a handle on this right here to kind of protect it. I know you can't really see that. I'm going to put a handle right there to protect it, but I'm going to use, a lot of people talk about like these sorts of handles, but you can't use them in certain places. I'm actually going to use a spacer so that it lifts it up this way, so it'll be like away from this a little bit, so that you can still route the input and output cables out of there, and it'll protect this, because this is sort of the most sensitive area. I think it's probably that cable that's sticking out the most, but that'll be helpful to have this there to protect it. Get some spacers later today at the hardware store. Alright, so I think we got everything wired in except for what's going into the switcher, so that's the very last thing I need to do. So it looks like it's about 10 cables and a tuner. So I'm going to get going. I usually like to start when I'm soldering these going one side and then going over. So my first in line is the compressor. So there's comp send, comp return. Actually, I lied. I got one more cable I got to do. I have this cable that's going into the Mobius from the Vertex boost, because the Vertex boost is just outside of the switcher. One more cable here before we go into it. You hate when you forget to put those on and you do a beautiful job soldering and then you got to disassemble the whole thing. Hey Zach, you'll be there soon enough. Yesterday we talked about True Tone CS6. Yeah, they're great. I love the CS6. David, I'm in, well, all of our operations are in Los Angeles. So as far as like where the products are manufactured, LA, and our showroom is in LA. But I personally live in Oakland, so that's where I am right now. But I spend probably 10 to 12 days a month in LA. Do I anticipate a pedal du jour? I mean, we haven't like made a excuse me, a routing for such, but one easy way if we did want to do a pedal du jour in the future is actually to use the expression port on the Vertex boost, because this volume pedal is not wired into that, but that can act as an effects loop. And if we really wanted to go crazy, I could actually drill out another hole in this Dunlop volume pedal, like a send and return. And you could have that so it would come after the overdrives but before the modulation section. So it would be possible. We didn't do that here, but is it possible? Absolutely. Man down. You gotta go soldered, folks. Friends don't let friends go solderless. I'll make a rookie mistake. And typically on stuff that has good crimps like this, I won't use heat shrink. But on all of the pedals that were using a right angle plug, or sorry, the pancake right angle, I will use heat shrink on those because the housing is a little loose with the diameter of this particular cable, and it really depends on the cable that you use. If I used a thicker cable than the 2319, then I may not need to use that. But because this is a more pedalboard friendly cable and it doesn't have as big of a outer insulator, we have to kind of make up that gap internally so that we don't get movement in the cable, because that's really where the failures typically happen on these sorts of patch cables. But you know, most of this stuff is going to be relatively sedentary and not moved a whole lot, so you know, it obviously cuts down wear and tear by not having them be plugged and unplugged all the time. Alright, we're good there. That was just our Mobius cable. For some reason this is loose. Let me zip tie that. These are my favorite needle nose pliers, by the way. They almost have like a gun grip to them or something. They're really long and easy to get into tight spaces on the pedal boards, especially when you're trying to find these zip ties. There we go. Kind of a loose zip tie there. I wanted to tighten up. Solderless slam. I will admit the solderless has come a long way, but gosh, it's so limited and very high resistance. I don't think you can beat the reliability of a soldered cable. I understand though, if you're trying to set up your rig fast, all that stuff, yeah, it can make sense from a consumer standpoint, but for this sort of stuff, I couldn't send something out the door solderless in good conscience. That's me. Yeah, and a lot of us are in that position for sure. You know, like what solderless cables do is it gives people access who wouldn't ordinarily buy the materials to do it, or you know, have the know-how to be able to do it. And that's really the purpose of this channel. You know, like this is just a hobby for me. You know, I only do 1 or 2 of these a month, and I do it for the purpose of the teaching aspect, because there is so much mysticism around this sort of stuff, and it's difficult to know how to do a lot of this stuff, because most people are pretty secretive. And I understand, you know, if this is your livelihood, you're probably not going to give everybody all the information. But I think at the end of the day, people who would rather pay somebody to do this are going to pay somebody to do this. The people that are going to want to do it themselves and kind of teach themselves how to fish, it's sort of like a different demographic. I don't think there's overlap. So this is for the people that really want to learn how to do it themselves. You know, I'll have done my job if you can do this as well as I can, you know, when you do your own boards. So that's sort of the goal here. Yeah, there's links in the other videos to the cables I use. Now I noticed, I looked for these the other day because I was sending a message to somebody who's just on the stream here, Zach. And Zach was asking me about sending him some of the resources of where we get stuff. And I noticed that these particular plugs look like they're out of stock right now on Amazon, but they're made by a company called Iconic. And they're really cool. Like, it for a really long time, the only the last gas station before the desert was the Switchcraft 380 if you wanted this style plug. But the drawback of them is that there's no strain relief. And this company, I don't know where they're made. I presume overseas, but I haven't seen any quality drawbacks. In fact, I prefer them to the Switchcraft variety because of this piece. Let's see if you can see it in focus. This piece right here, the strain relief, allows us to crimp and just makes us a much more solid cable. I haven't done any capacitance measurements on it to see, like, electrically how it compares, but the Switchcraft stuff is usually pretty high capacitance, actually. And I've always presumed, although I have no proof, that the reason for this was that when they were originally designed, that wasn't the the reason that they were making them. Like, these would be used on switchboards, for phone operators. So they weren't really thinking about low capacitance signals like we are thinking for guitar players. Just a different application. It sort of got hijacked by us as guitar people. So I don't think that was their intent, was to go for low capacitance plugs. But as I recall, when I had done some measurements, and this was a few years ago, I sort of done like a white paper about it, and Switchcraft was pretty high. And not that that's bad, but when you compound, let's say, 20 or 30 plugs, and the capacitance in the plugs is equal to the capacitance in the cable that you've run, that adds up. Even if you're using a buffer to help mitigate, the idea is always to eliminate as much capacitance as possible. All right, 2 down, 9 to go. All right. Do you use the same company? To mount pedals? You're talking about the dual lock Velcro. I mean, that's been around since before any of those guys. Dual lock is the preferred mounting mounting material for everything, in my opinion. Some people find it to be too aggressive and difficult to use, but I think it's absolutely, without question, the best. I'm seeing the connection resistance, because usually on a lot of the solderless cables, and again, I'm not a exhaustive expert on everything solderless, so there may be, I don't want to misquote what the published resistance specifications are, but when you're using tension or crimping to provide the connection, you have all these things occurring simultaneously on a pedal board. You have vibration and movement and all these things that, when you're relying on tension, even over time, if I've tensioned this and I've used Loctite, even with these flanges here that are for the Strymon bridge, like, they'll come loose over time no matter what I do. Like, I can use Loctite, I can use lock washers and all that stuff. It's just invariably going to happen. But when your signal is dependent upon the tightness of those connections, whether it's screwed on or whether it's crimped or whether it's angled, this is just something that has a probable and likely failure at some point. Now, that doesn't mean that it would happen in the next year, wouldn't mean that it would happen in the next day, but it's like when somebody comes to me, and again, I'm not building pedal boards the same way, in the same volume that I was, 10 years ago, but when people would come to me, they would come to me with the expectation that they would have something that would work for them reliably, and so that was always the goal that we would try to hit in assembling these boards. And I just couldn't give it to somebody knowing that there was a question mark or a shelf life to how long or reliable there'd be something, on the pedal board. And so the solderless cables, again, I think are great if you want to get going fast and you don't have the tools to solder. But if you have the tools to solder and you're willing to learn, we have the videos available for you. And if my videos don't work for you, there's a lot of other videos out there that are soldering tutorials that are great, and I really encourage you to check those out. And and you're not limited. You don't have to use the solderless cable, because a lot of those solderless cables are only designed to use with the cables that fit their plugs, and so you have like just their cable choices, and maybe that's changed. Maybe there's the ones now that you can use multiple types of cables. I don't know. But you're not locked into that system. You can use any cable that you want if you're soldering. You can use any type of connector that you want if you're soldering. There's like the cables that are available, for the longest time, like George L's to me, don't sound neutral at all. A lot of the solderless cables, just the cables, not even the connectors, don't sound like a neutral sound to me. They tend to exaggerate to my ear a lot of the high end, which is great if you're playing clean, but when you go to a dirty channel, this can often be problematic because it can exaggerate high end on something that already can be adding a lot of high end. It can sound kind of fizzy, and I try to stay away from fizz when possible, especially when talking about distortion. And sorry, Phil, I didn't read the second part of your question. In terms of high-end loss, no, I don't mean in terms of that. So that would be more capacitance issue, and just think of capacitance like a capacitor. It's like a filter, and every cable has its own filtering that it does. So you're sort of choosing when you choose a cable, and again, you're restricted to a degree with solderless because you have to use the cable that fits the connector, but you're choosing the filter that you prefer. And I've found that Mogami, to me, is sort of the most neutral in the application of a pedal board. Now, you don't necessarily have to use Mogami as your input cable, because that's, by input cable I mean the cable that goes into the pedal board itself. So it goes from your guitar to your pedal board. That's, if you're using a quality buffered rig, that's typically the most important cable to really vet for its sound quality, because it's the one that's going to make the most difference. Because once it goes low impedance on the board, a lot of the nuances of those cables are going to disappear, because once it goes low impedance, the sound is going to change some, and some of the qualities that you thought were redeemable about a specific cable are going to no longer be the same. So usually I tell people, if you really want to invest in a expensive cable that sounds a certain way, whether it's Vovox or Evidence or fill in the blank with whatever you want, I usually just worry about the one that's going into the pedal board. And then after that, using Mogami 2319. I just was at the John Mayer rehearsals the other week, and I think everything on that rig was Mogami. And I even think the guitar cable was like a Roadhog, so what do I know? Okay, so I'm answering a question now about the gauge of power cables. So there are ratings that have to do with voltage. So like in current. So you have like really high voltage, like AC, stuff like, there's gonna be a standard for that. I don't know what it is off the top of my head in terms of numbers, but for the this is so low current in the scheme of things, that the stuff that's provided with the power supplies is really more than adequate. There's not going to be any issue in terms of signal loss. There's something called cable resistance voltage that is like a phenomenon that if you have like lines that are a certain length, that by the end of them, like even if the power supply is putting out 9 volts, by the time you get to the very end of the line, that it could be measuring, say 8.5 or something like that, because it's dropped over the course of the line. But in the stuff that we're talking about, it's just not a thing. So I would just say, Voodoo Lab makes I think the best DC power cable, and they make one that you can buy for kind of DIYers, that's molded on one end, and then on the other side it's just blunt cut. And I think that's honestly the best one, because it's super long, first of all, which is just handy if you have a larger size pedal board. I always like to have more length and just cut away what I don't need. And it's shielded. And a lot of these power cables, even the ones from Tritone and from Strymon, I wish that they were shielded. They're not. And sometimes it's, for this again, it's sort of like nitpicking a little bit, because it's like, I don't know that the benefit of a shielded cable will ever actually be realized in this context, but on paper, shielded cables are better, and I'll show you what I mean by the difference. So here's a Voodoo Lab power cable. Okay, I'm going to sacrifice this one. So you can see that there is a shield here that is stranded, and then it has this center conductor here that's white with an insulator around it. If you look at a Strymon one, for example, and it's not just Strymon, it's like most companies, they have no shielding. There's just two different, there's some insulation around the center conductor and the shield. And I don't know how well you can see that on the camera, but this is not as ideal, because it's not as rejecting of noise as having a shield that's braided around the entire center conductor. It's just not as good. Now, again, it may never be realized, but this, if you had to choose, this is better. Over the way that the Strymon one is, where there's 2 individualized conductors that are both in their own insulators. This Voodoo Lab way, where it's shielded, that's better if you had to choose one. I use them both, but I don't know if you're gonna get like a real benefit, but if I were really being nitpicky, that's what I'd say. That's looking pretty clean in there so far. We got compressor wired in. Let's see what we got here. More stuff. Yeah, even the Free the Tone. I mean, I think the Free the Tone is he's got a cool system and it works great for him. But I think it's based on efficiency. Like, there's an efficiency. Guys who were doing solderless could probably be done with half of this by now. But I'm just, I just think that it's a compromise. It's a compromise. Let's see. Yeah, Gabby, friends don't let friends use this as a blue wrap. That's just for the Blue Man Group. Number one mistake people make in pedal selection on a pedal board when routing pedals. I mean, I would say that the biggest mistake that I see people make time and again is that they want options that are not reflective of their application. And I'd say this is mostly with people that are hobbyists that will want every option under the sun, and when they're given that option, that number of options, that invariably they realize that they catered their pedal board to the 10% of their application instead of like the 90% of their application. And so they invariably end up coming back and asking for a smaller consolidated pedal board. And in frustration a lot of times. But maybe that's part of the arc or the evolution that you need to go through in order to kind of learn that, But I always try to caution people on the outset about this sort of stuff because it's real, like it's really easy to forget that your pedal board needs to be functional for you, and having all these fringe things, like I don't know, like one thing that was a popular fad like 10 years ago was like having like a whammy, and having like what else did people were really into that were sort of like weird effects. Yeah, like having a whammy and putting that on the board, like at that point there wasn't like smaller versions, so it was just this huge thing, and it had like weird power requirements, and so you had to use like a pedal power AC, which was like the only option, and it just made everything bigger. Like you had to use a second power supply. There was no way that you could really do it unless you used the courtesy out on a pedal power 2 to power the thing. It just made it like a whole nightmare, and like all these people, I remember I had 3 different guys come back to me and like, oh, I really wish I didn't put the whammy on there, like I barely ever use it and I could have just put it off to the side on the times I wanted to use it. It's just like stuff like that. It's like when you build your rig, build it to the way that you're going to use it 90% of the time, and then that fringe stuff is just like you can either make little like audition loops in the board or put it off to the side depending on kind of where it needs to fall on the signal path. That's one thing I would say is a common recurring issue that people have, and it just ends up costing them more money. But again, maybe that's like kind of the process. I don't know. Take that for what you will. Would you consider good parameters? I know we already answered that. Is there a big difference between using a cable tester and making your own cables? They don't give more detailed information, and even cable testers can be bad because you can still read a connection and not have like great audio fidelity. One time when you'll see that is if you leave the black insulator on these. Let's see. If you leave the black insulator on the Mogami cable here and you solder that, sometimes it'll show that it tests like on a multimeter, but in reality it doesn't pass, and so sometimes the cable readers will read a connection, but doesn't necessarily tell you if it's like going to sound 100% right when you go to actually put it together. So I would use them as a tool. But I think you should still, as a rule, double check them yourself to make sure that you don't get any funny business. John May rehearsals. Yeah, I'm not able to show like a lot of video about it, but I will be showing some where it's appropriate. And yeah, essentially the tour rehearsals, we were invited out, and it was a really cool night. There was like catered food truck and desserts, and then you get to watch an hour and a half long set after you're fed dinner, which is pretty cool, and it was a cool little exclusive crowd. Me and Gabriel were probably the lowest brow dudes in the audience. There's a lot of famous individuals there, both in music and in film and television. So it's definitely an honor to be able to go. Let's see. Oh yeah.
Have you cut Strymons and Klon is already creating?
Oh, well, yeah, having 3 Strymons and a Klon, yeah, that's, those are big ones. But, you know, at least with the Strymon, they're sort of Swiss Army knives, so you get a lot of function out of them for what they are. Klon, though, yeah, it's unnecessarily big. And honestly, I really like the Rocket Archer. If you really like that sound and you don't want a gargantuan platform, I think they sound really good. And I used to buy Klons all the time. I remember being here when I went to college in Berkeley, and I remember buying Klons for like 250 bucks on Craigslist, like around 2000, between like 2002 and like 2005 maybe.
Have you ever tried Sommer cables?
You know what, I did, and it was about 10, not quite 10 years ago, maybe like 8 years ago. Um, you know, I really don't get into like a lot of the super boutique cables because I feel like when we test cables, we usually test them in isolation. So we just like plug into an amp, we go to a guitar shop or wherever, we plug in an amp, and we listen to the cable, and that's cool. But for a lot of us, that's like never how we would use that cable. Like we would use it into, you know, a switcher with 20 other pedals, or we'd use it into a pedal board, and that changes the performance of the cable. You know, so you're not really testing it in the environment that it actually be used. So a lot of cables sound great when it's just the cable and the amp, but at least in my context, that was never how I was using the cable. And so you always sort of have to take into consideration the application, and like, does it sound good when it's being followed by 20 pedals, a switcher, and then another 20-foot cable that's not a Sommer cable or fill in the blank cable going back to the amp. So these are questions. These are questions to consider. We're looking good. Let's see what we got here. TS send, TS return. That's Tone Secret, not Tube Screamer, but you may infer some of the origins of the Tone Secret based on those initials.
Sommer cables. That's technical properties.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of attributed technical properties, I should say, Davide, regarding cables, and certainly ones that I've been guilty of myself in when we used to have cables that were in essence built-in 9778s. There's just, and I also think the Belden 9778 is an incredible cable, and I highly recommend that people check that out if they haven't already tried Belden cables before. They are really excellent. It's what Pete Cornish uses for his cable, not 9778. He uses a mic cable that's a twisted pair shielded, which is, I think it's called 8380 or 8412 maybe. I'll look that up and link it here before we end. But that's a pretty cool cable.
Your bolt cable, patch cables. Oh, cool. Well,
If they're cheap, I guess you could try them, and you don't risk much. But I'm telling you, man, for pedal boards, unless like somebody's really got like a love for a real specific cable, I think that the 2319 is really good and sort of the industry standard from my perspective.
TS Terror Squad. Yeah, well,
Outpour, I think it seems like those guys have really transitioned more into just pedal demos, um, and not so much the building side. And I'm not, again, this is my hobby, so I'm not really looking to. Sorry, I lost one. Had a bad cable there. Getting back to the pedal show guys, yeah, they seem to really be focusing in more on pedal demos, which is cool. And they have like a real specific way that they like to wire stuff and materials and all that, and that's totally fine. I'm more interested in, like I don't sell any of these products that I'm using for the pedal board building in and of itself. Obviously there's some of my pedals on this board, but I don't sell pedal board products. I don't sell switchers. I don't sell pedal boards. I don't sell cables. And my idea is really about equipping you with that. So I'm really hoping that that the difference that people will see between the two, and they can be really great resources for people that are into this sort of thing. But I'm hoping that the differentiator for us will be that people can really come here, they can ask questions, they can figure out how to do this themselves, and they're not reliant on any particular dogma of pedal board building so much as they understand sort of the requisite skills to be able to do this, where to get the right materials, and putting the onus on the viewer, and not having it be having to have a specific set of switchers or power supplies or whatever. All this stuff, I don't get paid for any of the endorsements that I do. I put some Amazon links on all this stuff, and I think Amazon gives us like a commission if you buy off of one of our Amazon links, but it's like pennies. I think it's like a single digit percentage or something like that. To be honest, I don't even know that we've ever even gotten a dividend from them. But I'm not selling any switchers. I just recommend the ones I think are best, and every pedal board has a different application, so my recommendations may be different depending on the actual rig in question.
This year, are you going to make a new pedal?
Well, I've already made the Tone Secret, which is the first release of the year. The next release is called the Nile compressor, and that is the Nile Rodgers thing, where he used an 1176 into a Neve console, and would use the 1176 to distort the Neve. And it's a really cool thing. You can get some of those classic Nile Rodgers, like Chic and Sister Sledge type tones, and you can also get the really cool like Prince stuff, like Kiss, because they both use that same thing where they went direct. Sorry, there's a really large car out there. Where they both went direct, and they would use the 1176 to overdrive that Neve. So I've basically deconstructed the two parts. You have an individual foot switch for each, so you can engage the Neve only and just use it almost like as almost like a mastering sort of effect, or you can use it to be overdriven by the 1176, or you can just use the 1176 on its own and not have to use any of the Neve console thing. So sort of what I consider the gold standard for compression. And we're also working on another compressor with a super cool dude that I can't talk about yet, but if you're into this band that's super funky and super hip, that a lot of people know, you'll be happy about this collaboration. So I'll leave it at that.
Let's see.
Ben, none of these are switchcraft connectors. They're all GLS audio except for the straights, which are made by Iconic Cables. I prefer these to the Switchcraft 380s because of the strain relief. As far as the other connectors, are Switchcrafts better built? I think the answer is yes. For this application, is it an advantage? No, because these are living in an environment where they're not being moved a whole lot. And I actually don't think that GLS are terrible. If I thought that, I wouldn't use them. I think that they are, you know, it's a car that can go the speed limit. And if the speed limit is let's say 80 miles an hour, and the car can go 80 miles an hour, then we sort of have a good fit for our application. So I think the Switchcrafts mechanically are better. I know that they're not better electrically in terms of their spec. But you know, if you have Switchcrafts already, I wouldn't tell you to rip them off the board. But if you're starting fresh, I don't think the advantage of a Switchcraft will be realized in this application. So you know, when customers ask me, I will tell them I think that this is you could go Switchcraft, but it's not necessary. It's not going to gain you anything. All right, you're looking real clean in there. Happy about all that.
Let's see. What else we got? How much soldering?
I don't do much because I usually have. I mean, I can't move the camera right now, but it's really well ventilated, so we don't have any issues there.
And was the T-drive built alongside Trainwreck? Yes, it was. It was an Express. Very nice, Outpour East. Yeah, well, keep asking questions. Javier, I can't confirm or deny. Any info on that pedal riser?
If you look in our description, I believe that we talk about the where we get these. It's from Fix Pedalboards, and they don't list these on their site, so you have to email them directly and ask about a custom size. But if you say, I watched the Vertex effects video, they said to contact you, the guy that you're going to talk to, his name is Roy, he will know what you're talking about. I think that they're closed on Fridays, so if you because I think that they do like 10-hour days, but if you talk to Roy, I'm sure he can help you, and he will definitely hook you up. And I would say, on these, the price varies because the price of aluminum is sort of variable. But they usually range, I would say, depending on the size, like, maybe $80-ish or so. And I know that sounds like a lot, but this board otherwise would be a heck of a lot bigger than this. And so the benefits are there. Benefits are there, and the size and space savings are incredible. I think we got everything. I think we got everything up to date now. We're almost done. Got only after these, just 2 more left. Hoping that I can have this ready for Anthony this afternoon so that he can test. Origin stuff, yeah, they're great. I think that they're really well built. Um, I haven't messed a lot with the Revival drive, which I think is their new overdrive, so I can't really speak to that. But the compressors I always thought sounded good. You know, if you were into the 1176 thing, I think that was I think it's a cool pedal. I like the you know, like obviously it's a premium device, so it has a higher price. But one that I like a lot that is actually going on this board is the bass compressor. And I think this sounds really good. It kind of has that studio vibe to it, although it kind of reminds me more of like a DBX style compressor, which is like, you know, what they used like on a lot of those Michael Jackson sessions, like Paul Jackson Jr. and stuff like that. So that's kind of a cool sound, and a lot of the studio guys, you know, even, you know, Paul Jackson Jr. included, used to use it pretty widely on guitar. Like I think even Steve Lukather used to use a DBX compressor like that, like a 160X in his rack for a long time, because it was sort of the gold standard of the 80s. How would you recommend setting up a pedal or someone who changes pedals a lot? It's a good question. Yeah, I think it's something that I think a lot of the pedalboard builder guys struggle with, because they're used to having the pedals be somewhat sedentary, you know, as a rule. So this kind of defeats that. Well, so I would say that you're gonna have to be okay with like a little bit extra slop on the pedal board, because you're gonna want to make your connections larger than they need, you know, or longer than they need to be for your cables, and that's just so you can accommodate different types of routing. Let's see. Did we lose it? No, we're good. See here, sorry. So yeah, I think the challenge is that. Very cool. Yeah, so I think you're gonna have to just leave stuff like a little bit longer than you would ordinarily. And having a switcher like this kind of allows you to have some extra slop, because if you have like a riser like this, you can cover up a lot of the cable excess, so that you don't have to have it be noticeable, and that just gives you some, you know, a little bit of extra grace to be able to have some messier wiring. So that's one solution, but yeah, I don't know that there's like I don't know if I have like an amazing answer for you on this one. It's sort of like, you know, having switchers, having, you know, bridges like this sort of helps keep it clean, but I don't think it's not, certainly not a cure-all for what you're asking. I think you just have to be kind of okay with some things being longer, maybe not being quite as neat as the Sacrifice. Dual lock is without question the best pedalboard material, or like applying pedals to a pedalboard material. It is absolutely the best, undoubtedly, and it is the most travel worthy. And I've linked, there's specific models of dual lock, because there's different degrees of dual lock. You know, so if you want like the black belt of dual lock, you'll get the SJ3551 and use that on the bass, and then maybe use an SJ3550 on the pedals, and a mismatch of dual lock actually creates the best adhesion. So that's something to note. That having like mirroring types of dual lock on both sides actually is not as strong as a connection. So it's actually better to mismatch them, and it'll stick a little bit better. It'll make it a little bit harder to remove. And I typically do that in most applications, unless somebody is, like what somebody mentioned before, where they want to change pedals all the time, and they don't want to just they want to try to do minimal. They want to minimally disrupt the rig. Then I can understand the desire for that. But you can always just use one of these. This is a great tool. This is a upholstery crowbar. It's made out of plastic, and so you can take stuff off easy. It doesn't damage the pedals. All right, we're getting close. Two more connectors. And then we're going to have to make a trip to the hardware store to get some spacers for the handle. Okay. The white one or the clear one? When you're talking about different dual locks, I think the clear one is more expensive, and it uses a different type of adhesive on the bottom. And if it's the same density, and I don't know if it is or not, so you'd have to check the specification on that in terms of the number of loops per square inch. But assuming it's the same density, I think that the difference is really preference. Some people don't like the black because it has a white adhesive, and if you put it too close to the edge of the pedal, it can be visible. But if you know how to mitigate that by just backing it off from the edge a little bit, in terms of holding power, no difference there. And I think the black is typically cheaper than the clear version. So usually, if with the two options being equal, I just say go with the one that is less costly. Well, I mean, the benefit of these boards is that really any case can work, whereas if you use, pedal train or fill in the blank, you're restricted to whatever their case is, and I don't like pedal boards where the case is part of the pedal board, because if you damage the case, your pedal board is now in jeopardy. So, I did a few pedal boards maybe 5 years ago where I did like a built-in case where the flight case and the board were essentially the same platform, and you just put on the top and you'd walk away. And I think you're asking for trouble, and I think it's the reason why we don't see a lot of touring musicians do that, and they use still this style, even though maybe it seems antiquated to you. Because you can really build it into any case you want, and for cartage, this is sort of the standard, and so, call it old-fashioned, but this is you're competing against you're competing against a standard that's been established for a really long time, and I think it's dangerous to go with those pedal boards incorporated into the case, because again, if something goes wrong, you are screwed. Like you can't separate the pedal board from the case. They're the same apparatus. So it's not like you just go grab a new case. It's like you're done. You gotta rebuild the whole pedal board into a new case. But hard cases, I mean, Get Off My Case makes great hard cases. They make shock mounted ones if you want like a real, like, true flight case. But for most people, the Pelican cases, the air cases are the best, I think. And that's what I usually recommend to people, is get the Pelican air cases. They're super lightweight. They're very, very durable. Most of them are waterproof, so you could use them as a flotation device if, you're having a pool party. So it's just good fun for the whole family there. Double Vertex boost to run one before. Sure, you could do it. Some people on the pre boost like it, because it's adding distortion. They want maybe more color out of it. So it depends on what you want. If you want the transparent aspect of the Vertex boost before adding more gain, that's cool. But some guys like to run stuff that has more of an EQ shift. So that's a consideration if you're thinking about what type of boost to use there. Maybe use something more like a RC booster or a EP booster. Those that kind of have a lot of color to them, but in like a good way. It just depends on what you're looking for. Any chance of seeing a dual boost in one enclosure? Surprisingly, even though the boost only has one knob, the circuitry on it is the most complicated of any of our pedals, actually. And that's why it's more expensive. And I know that to people it weirds them out, because they're just like, oh, it only has one knob. And somehow we've equated the number of knobs with value. Yeah, the boost is very complicated. I don't know that we could actually fit two of them in that enclosure, just in terms of the circuit board. Maybe if we did a double-sided circuit board and had components running on both sides, it might be possible. But I haven't looked into doing it seriously. I've thought about it a few times, but never did any serious consideration. Oh, I did it on the last cable. I forgot to put the housing around it. So I did a nice soldering job here. I forgot my housing. I actually don't even know where it went. Oh, let's grab another. A little earlier on, I said, don't you hate when you forget to put the housing on? And sure enough, the last one on here had to do it. Couldn't help myself. I'm kind of glad I left a little extra space on this cable because I think I'm going to have to recut it. Got a little too fried here. I didn't do an A+ desoldering job on that one. Try again. Nope. Not immune to a rookie mistake. It happens. It happens to us all. Almost unavoidable, I would say. Let's try again. Take 2. Not quite as sexy as the other ones, but totally functional. Sometimes when you reopen these crimps, they can go together a little funny. Just want to make sure I'm doing the best I can to keep it legit. That looks good. I'm okay with that. Perfect. All right. Let's see how that looks. We're all wired in. Feeling pretty good about this here. Just going to take the tone brush. My favorite pedalboard cleaning device. Looking pretty good here. Tone brush. Hey, greetings from Paris. Cool. All right. Looking pretty good here. Dang. It's gonna be clean. So I'm gonna clean up the kind of these back cables a little bit. But I just kind of wanted to see an initial fit here. I'm just gonna kind of plug everything in just to kind of see what how we're looking. Maybe reroute one of these cables here, but we're getting looking pretty good. Kind of what we got. This is pretty much fully assembled at this point. We're going to add on this handle here to kind of protect that stuff. Put it on a little bit of a riser or a little bit of a spacer. We're back. Lost it again. All right. Well, yeah. So we're looking pretty good here. Pretty much everything is assembled. I'm curious how much it actually weighs. Anybody have any guesses? Guesses on weight? Alright, let's see what we got. Just going to show you that we're going to zero this thing out. Alright, it's reading 0. So I'm going to put it under here, and then I'm just going to hit tear, and then pull it back out. I get this centered so it doesn't. Let's see. Okay, I'm hitting the tear button. And there we are. 25 pounds, 1.5 ounces. Let's see if we can see that. Oh shit. We lost the power. Oh, it was 25 pounds, 1.5 ounces. So all this, 25 pounds. Yeah, I think we're pretty much done here. I'll probably go to the hardware store, get some of this stuff that we need, and get right into the testing phase from here. I think Anthony's going to be over here this afternoon. to do some testing as well. So, job well done. Yeah. Yeah, you got a couple of people. Jonathan was pretty close. Whoever guesses it gets the pedal board. Yeah, so this is pretty darn lightweight, I'd say. So this is cool. We're almost there. We're almost there completely. Feeling good about this. All right, guys, that was a good 2 hours. Some Master P references already. All right. Thanks, guys. See ya.